1943, Italy. The Allies had won a toehold on Europe. After bloody Salerno, prime objective was Foggia, an array of Nazi-Italian airfields strategically close to the heart of Germany.
Early the next year, General Spaatz came to Foggia to inspect us. Nate Twining's new outfit, the 15th Air Force. General Aker was taking over command of the Mediterranean theater. The brass met to plan air support, the keystone for Allied armies on the road to Rome.
Winter rains made sunny Italy a sea of mud. Taking 61 days to travel 8 miles, the Fifth Army inched its way up the boot. Their order was, push north through the German lines and liberate Rome.
Every day at 0600, the 12th Air Force reported for tactical missions. Fighting the same winter weather, we were handed the grim job of blasting a hole through the Gustav line. We fighter pilots were the sword point of the new Mediterranean Allied Air Forces. Forged in Africa, tempered in Pantelleria, and blooded in Sicily, the 12th was now put to the big test. Italy, no soft underbelly, was defended by at least 24 tough German divisions. We had 11. To balance the opposing forces, we mounted daily strikes to protect our tanks, to clear a path for our infantry. Although weather, terrain, and Nazis had finally stopped our armies, they never stopped us. There was no mud in the sky. Allied air power and Allied ground power had been welded into an effective team to defeat the enemy's greater forces. Our plan called for steady ground pressure to be synchronized with strong airstrikes. American airmen were taking off to buzz the Appian Way, the ancient highway trod by Caesar's triumphant legions of old. It was our job to open the rugged road to Rome. Blocking the way were minefields, occupied villages, protected by Nazi airdromes and Nazi tanks.
Air support wasn't easy. On the mainland, the enemy had all his resources at hand. Here was a network of rails and roads that had to be cut before our own troops, stymied on the narrow mountainous peninsula, could move. Even Army mules had difficulty climbing Italy's rocky backbone. Allied forces, which now included some Italians, measured our advances in mountaintops instead of miles. San Pietro, like dozens of other German-held towns, was caught in a tight net of artillery fire. At times, our men felt they were on the long end of a forgotten front. But in spite of terrain, weather, and dug-in Nazis, the Fifth Army kept up the pressure. From village to village, from mountain to mountain, it was the same bitter action. Attacks and advances. They approached Cassino, gateway to Rome. This was one of those bitter moments born by war. High atop Monastery Hill in the Abbey of Monte Cassino, The godless Nazis had installed an observation post and from there followed the movements of Allied soldiers below. Relying on the reluctance of the Allies to damage the Abbey, the Germans dominated the Leary Valley. From the sacred citadel itself, they tried to destroy the forces of freedom by directing concentrations of accurate and murderous fire. American Fifth Army artillery hammered back. Stalemated by the enemy's unique position, the road to Rome was blocked.
After weeks of investigation, including personal reconnaissance over Monte Cassino by Generals Acre and Devers, the Allies decided we would bomb and shell the Nazi-held town and abbey. For tactical reasons, Acre was opposed to the bombing. Instead, he favored using air to strangle enemy supply. But Allied leaders felt the continued sacrifice of our own men must stop. Everything else having failed, the Allies ordered air power to neutralize the Nazi observation post.
Worried Germans heard the first wave drone overhead. Like rabbits, the enemy darted into surrounding caves and tunnels carved into solid rock. Long prepared, their Gustav line pivoted on fortified Cassino, the town as well as the abbey, which the Germans had made a military target. But the enemy survived the bombing. Fanatic, they still had the will to fight. Up from their tunnels, their bunkers, up into the ruins, their tough paratroopers quickly regrouped. In minutes, they reestablished their strong points. The Germans were back in business. Rubble as well as Nazis blocked the way.
Air leaders finally convinced everyone that the only way we could crack the Gustav line was to choke off the enemy's flow of supplies south of Rome. The operation was aptly named Strangle. In March, those of us flying for the 12th and 15th Air Forces began to deliver a series of blows against rail yards, tracks, trains, and bridges, especially bridges. In Italy, there were more than 40,000 bridges. Allowing the enemy no sanctuary, Operation Strangle was successful from the start. We hunted enemy trains and cut their lines in more than 100 places. we hunted trucks and ships. We strangled enemy supply. On May 11th, we opened a new air and ground drive, a big one. We had the enemy on the run. 3 days later, our Fifth Army cracked the Gustav line. It had taken 7 weeks to cut his main arteries and let enemy supply bleed to death. Mobility, the heart of German ground strength, was stymied. All his bridges were falling down. In the words of General Mark Clark, with the splendid effort of our Air Force, we put the enemy on the road.
Allied forces had triumphed at a price. Part of it, 9,000 airmen. But the road to Rome was open at last. There were cheers from grateful Romans for the weary men who had exploded through the tight enemy ring at Anzio's bloody beachhead. Now, after 9 months of brutal war, half of once Nazi-dominated Italy was free, and the Eternal City opened its arms. Out of Casino and Operation Strangle came new lessons in the application of air power. In the forthcoming prelude to the Normandy invasion, you will see these hard-won lessons and tactics sharpened by the now campaign-wise United States Air Force. 1943, Burma. 2 years after Pearl Harbor, General Joseph Stilwell opened his long-delayed campaign for a ground supply route to China. With a handful of Americans and American-equipped Chinese divisions, he was advancing to meet the Japanese Imperial Army and drive them out of Burma. Stillwell had molded the once pulpy mass of ill-fed peasant soldiers into skilled top fighters, able to meet the Japanese on equal terms. But this Allied penetration, named Operation Saucy, was unusually difficult. The men had to fight the Japs and the disease-infested jungle in order to stay alive.
As a transport pilot, my job was to fly help to Vinegar Joe's army. He was entirely dependent on our 10th Air Force for ammo and medicine, clothing and food. Stillwell's men marked their drop zones as they inched steadily closer to Jap positions. The progress of an army depended on a co-pilot's signal. General Stratemeyer had warned the Pentagon, the only way we can supply any force that advances into Burma is by airdrop. That's why when Stillwell started this offensive southward from Lido, he had air supply for his advancing troops. Our supply pushers developed bomb sight precision. For the past year, split-second timing had meant survival to lonely air warning outposts perched on jungle-covered ridges in the Naga Hills. Air supply and the successful teamwork of the Eastern Air Command now made it possible for the Burma campaign to drive ahead.
But in the jungle, the mission that the Joint Chiefs of Staff had given General Stillwell was one of the toughest in the war. He had a most difficult physical problem of great distances, almost impassable terrain. Cutting their own trail, Stillwell's army stumbled along at barely a mile an hour. The Chinese jockeyed for a frontal position, flanked by other Allied forces. It was a two-pronged drive to split the Jap wedge and reopen the Burma Road. The advance by the Chinese army into the Hukung Valley was the most ambitious campaign yet staged on the end of a thin airborne supply line. With amazing vigor, Stilwell carried on. Wounded men, the enemy, and the jungle were his obstacles. Quick evacuation of casualties could hasten the campaign, cut it down to months instead of years. But how can you get a wounded man out of the jungle fast?
In the CBI, a plane we called the Sky Jeep was the answer. It was both a light transport and an ambulance. Able to operate from temporary airfields, we achieved a high degree of mobility and secrecy. In 1 month, 10 sergeant-driven Sky Jeeps carried out more than 700 casualties. With one of Stilwell's wounded soldiers aboard, the last chance got ready for takeoff. The Burma campaign made full use of air power, from transports and bombers to an armada of Sky Jeeps. Upwards of 100,000 men were constantly supplied and evacuated by air. Eventually, the Allies were able to drive the enemy out of Burma.
Down at Allied bases south of New Guinea's Owen Stanley Mountains, another army of men and planes prepared for the first Allied paratroop drop in the Pacific. It was designed to cut off a large force of Japs at Nadzab in northeast New Guinea. Early in the morning of 5 September, 1,700 sky jumpers in full battle array climbed aboard a fleet of General George Kenney's 5th Air Force transports. At 08:25 hours, the first C-47s rolled down the runway. Within 15 minutes, 3 flights totaling 79 planes took off. In all, 302 aircraft slid into place and, like a mighty procession, paraded toward Nadzab. The pilots gradually dropped from altitudes of 3,500 feet down to 500 feet. So far, no trace of the enemy, but no chances were being taken. A squadron of low-flying attack bombers laid columns of smoke on the floor of the Nadzab Valley. Once over the target area, the transports formed into 3 columns, each with 32 planes. The 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment and a battalion of Australians tumbled out to make their first drop, and with success. Nadzab, the Japs' back door, was left open. With Allied forces firmly installed in northeast New Guinea and the Solomons, General MacArthur and Admiral Halsey could now threaten Rabaul, the enemy's main supply center in this critical area.
For 3 days in a row, we were alerted for a strong, low-level attack to knock out Rabaul on New Britain Island. At forward staging bases in New Guinea, our B-25s waited for weather as we got ready. We were going to depend on our gunners to neutralize enemy planes in Akak in order for the rest of us to smash the airdromes around Rabaul and then destroy the concentration of military shipping in Simpson Harbor.
Ever since January 1942, units of the 5th Air Force had continually blasted Rabaul. Today, November 2nd, 1943, the briefing officer announced that the 8th Photo Squad flying recon over Simpson Harbor had seen 7 destroyers and 20 merchant vessels. At the airdromes, they had counted 237 planes. This sounded like a rough mission. At the fighter pilot briefings, P-38 boys were given details of the plan that required perfect coordination between bomber and fighter elements. Surprise and timing were the mainsprings of the battle plan that the successful air campaigner General Kenney now put in motion. Briefings over, 5 squadrons of Mitchells, a force of 80 medium bombers, were boarded and revved up. Shortly after 1000 hours, The tower gave them the go-ahead, and the bombers got underway. Then the fighters got ready. From 6 squadrons of Lightnings, 2 squadrons had orders to sweep Simpson Harbor, 4 to flank the land batteries. In all, 80 Lightnings scrambled off.
In good flying weather, our bombers held their formations as we headed toward Rabaul. Leader of our shipping strike forces was a veteran of 80 strafing missions, 25-year-old attack group commander Major John Hennebrey. Once over the Solomon Sea, the Kenny plan went into high gear. As we scanned the skies, we spotted what we were looking for: enemy aircraft. Our Lightning swept in ahead of the bombers to clear the area. When 2 Zeros challenged Captain Ralph Bills and his wingman, he opened up. First, Bills didn't connect, so he got his .38 on the Jap's tail, and the battle turned into a chase. Paving the way for the attack, our Lightnings ran into more than 60 interceptors. The P-38 escort, led by Major Gerald Johnson and Captain Richard Bong, flew interference with the anti-aircraft neutralizing forces. They attacked swiftly and with a double intent of covering the B-25s and destroying the enemy. Our surprise visit gave the Jap pilots at Lakunai Airdrome short warning before the speedy P-38s peeled off and dropped their bombs. Next, we dove in on aircraft parked on hard stands and revetments. Three minutes later, 4 bombardment squadrons approached the target area. Assigned to neutralize shore anti-aircraft positions, the B-25s peeled off. Parachute fragmentation bombs, because of their delayed explosions, permitted us to get down low and blast the enemy out of their hiding places. It was this complete neutralization which finally enabled our striking forces to make dangerous mast-high runs over Simpson Harbor. At Rabaul this day, we bombed 24 enemy ships. We strafed 17. Our bombers destroyed 52 enemy aircraft. Our fighters claimed 42 shot out of the sky. The cost, 45 American flyers, 17 American planes. In the space of 12 minutes, a formidable Japanese sea and air armada was attacked and decisively defeated.
After 2 years of war, the Japanese strategic plan had been fatally upset. But the Allies knew the enemy was not yet destroyed. Her armies and navy still controlled conquered territory. General Arnold told the world, "There are many roads that lead right to Tokyo, and we're not going to neglect any of them." Relentlessly, the Allied attack had to continue, spearheaded by the striking power of the United States Air Force.